The Nevada desert stretched out under the vast, indifferent sky, a parched and desolate landscape where secrets seemed to cling to the heat haze. Near the dusty, unmarked perimeter of what was once the infamous Area 51, a lone, weather-beaten trailer sat stubbornly against the harsh environment. This was home to Miles Corbin, a man whose life revolved around the static hum of the airwaves and the faint hope of a signal that wasn't of this earth. Miles wasn't your typical conspiracy theorist, a former radio engineer with a knack for picking out the faintest signals from the noise. He'd become obsessed with the unexplained after stumbling upon anomalous broadcasts years ago. His small shack was a chaotic nest of antennas, receivers, and blinking monitors, all tuned to the whispers of the cosmos and the secrets buried beneath the Nevada sand. Tonight was different. A new signal had emerged from the usual cacophony of static, a complex, rhythmic pulse that seemed almost deliberate. It was faint, barely audible, but undeniably there, originating from somewhere within the heavily guarded exclusion zone. Miles leaned closer to his headphones, his heart quickening with a familiar thrill of discovery. This wasn't random noise. This had structure. Days turned to nights as Miles meticulously recorded and analyzed the strange transmission. The pulses resolved into intricate patterns, mathematical sequences that defied terrestrial origins. Mixed within the alien rhythm were fragmented sounds that sent a shiver down his spine, distorted snippets of what sounded like human voices, stretched and twisted by some unknown form of modulation. It was as if someone or something was trying to speak through a veil of static and cosmic interference. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, Miles began to delve deeper. He cross-referenced the signal patterns with declassified military communications and obscure scientific journals. He even dusted off his old cryptography manuals, his fingers flying across his makeshift keyboard as he attempted to unravel the alien code. Then came the breakthrough. Using a long-forgotten decryption algorithm rumored to have been employed by early SETI researchers, Miles managed to isolate a recurring sequence within the transmission. It wasn't a language he recognized, but it had a distinct structure, almost like a distress signal. As the decoded fragments began to appear on his screen, Miles felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. The symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen, yet they conveyed a sense of urgency, of containment, and something else, something that felt profoundly ancient and disturbingly alive. The echoes of Area 51 were speaking, and they were saying more than anyone had ever dared to imagine. Miles knew he was treading on dangerous ground. Anyone snooping around Area 51, even remotely, risked attracting unwanted attention. He had to be careful, his every move calculated. He started using encrypted networks and bouncing his signal through servers across the globe, trying to mask his location. The more he deciphered, the more unsettling the message became. The alien symbol seemed to depict a form of life, fragile, bioluminescent beings held within some kind of containment. The fragmented audio hinted at cries, not of pain, but of despair, as if these entities were in a state of prolonged suffering. One recurring audio fragment, heavily distorted, almost sounded like the word release. Miles also noticed a pattern in the signal's timing. It seemed to correlate with specific lunar cycles and even solar flares, suggesting a connection to celestial events that he couldn't readily explain. Could the signal be powered by some form of cosmic energy, or was it timed to coincide with specific astronomical alignments for a reason he couldn't yet fathom? His solitary existence was soon disrupted. One sweltering afternoon, a pair of unmarked black SUVs appeared on the dusty road leading to his trailer. Two men in dark suits emerged, their faces grim and their eyes scanning his property with cold efficiency. "Mr. Corbin?" one of them asked, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Who's asking?" "We're with, a private research group," the man replied, his gaze unwavering. "We understand you've been picking up some unusual transmissions." "Transmissions? I mostly listen to old country and the occasional weather report." The other man stepped forward, holding up a printout of one of Miles's complex signal diagrams. "This doesn't look like Hank Williams, Mr. Corbin. We're interested in what you've heard. Cooperate, and things will be much easier for you." Miles knew that easier was a relative term. These weren't just curious researchers. They were the gatekeepers of secrets, and he had stumbled too close to the truth. He decided to play along, for now. "Look," Miles said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace, "I've just been tinkering with my equipment. Sometimes I pick up weird stuff. Static, you know? The desert plays tricks on the airwaves." The men didn't look convinced. "We'll be keeping an eye on you, Mr. Corbin. We suggest you do the same." They turned and walked back to their vehicles, leaving Miles standing in the dust, the weight of their warning heavy in the desert air. He knew his time was running out. He had to understand the signal, and he had to reveal what he knew before they silenced him permanently. The whispers in the static held a secret the world needed to hear. The visit from the men in black did the opposite of what they intended. It didn't scare Miles into silence. It lit a fire under him. Their thinly veiled threats were a confirmation the signal was real, and the secret it held was big enough to warrant a personal visit from the government's boogeymen. He was on to something, and now he had to move faster. Miles knew he couldn't crack this alone. He needed someone with a deeper, more theoretical understanding of extraterrestrial communication. He thought of Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant but disgraced astrophysicist who had been unceremoniously ousted from the SETI program 2 decades ago for his unorthodox theories about non-carbon-based life forms and quantum entanglement as a means of communication. The academic community had labeled him a crackpot, but Miles had always respected his mind. If anyone could understand the structure of this signal, it was Thorne. Finding Thorne wasn't easy. After his public shaming, he had dropped off the grid completely. Miles spent a full day digging through old academic archives, encrypted forums, and the dark corners of the web. Finally, he found a digital breadcrumb. A single post on an obscure physics forum with a user with a familiar writing style referencing a remote observatory in the mountains of Utah. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. Miles packed a small bag, a satellite phone, and his most crucial piece of equipment, a hardened laptop containing all the data he had collected on the signal. He knew leaving his trailer was a risk. The men in black were watching him, and leaving his base of operations would make him vulnerable. But staying put was no longer an option. As he drove his old pickup truck through the vast, empty desert under the cover of night, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every pair of headlights in his rear-view mirror seemed to linger a little longer than usual. Every shadow seemed to move. The whispers in the static had become a ghost in his machine, a haunting presence that followed him out of his trailer and into the lonely darkness of the American West. The hunt for answers had officially begun, and Miles was now both the hunter and the hunted. The observatory was even more isolated than Miles had imagined. Perched precariously on a wind-swept peak in the desolate Utah mountains, it looked like a relic from a bygone era of amateur astronomy. The main dome was rusted, and the surrounding buildings appeared deserted. For a moment, Miles wondered if his lead had been a dead end. He found Thorne in a small, cluttered office filled with dusty books, outdated scientific equipment, and stacks of papers covered in complex equations. Thorne himself was a gaunt figure with wild gray hair and eyes that held a spark of intense intelligence, even after years of isolation. He looked surprised to see Miles, a complete stranger, standing in his doorway. Miles didn't waste any time. He introduced himself and laid out his findings, playing recordings of the strange signal and showing Thorne the partially decoded symbols. Thorne listened intently, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a flicker of recognition. This is unlike anything I've encountered," Thorne murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair as he leaned closer to Miles's laptop screen. "The mathematical structure. It resonates with some of my earlier theories about interdimensional communication." Miles was taken aback. "Interdimensional?" Thorne nodded, his eyes gleaming with a renewed sense of purpose. "The universe we perceive might not be the only one."
Thorne knew these mountains. He led Miles through a network of hidden trails and abandoned mining tunnels, moving with surprising agility for his age. They traveled for hours, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on loose rock and the wind whistling through the peaks. Thorne explained that the observatory had been partially funded by a shadowy group of independent researchers who believed in phenomena the mainstream science establishment dismissed. They had established a rudimentary escape network in case of unwanted attention. Their destination was a small camouflaged bunker, hidden deep within a disused mine. It was sparsely equipped, but had a generator, basic supplies, and most importantly, a secure satellite uplink. Once inside, Thorne immediately set about trying to boost the signal from Miles' laptop and analyze the newest fragments of the alien message. "They're evolving," Thorne said, his brow furrowed in concentration as he stared at the screen. "The patterns are becoming more complex, the vocal fragments clearer, though still deeply unsettling." One new audio snippet was particularly disturbing. It was a drawn-out, almost mournful sound, like a prolonged sigh or a cry of anguish, followed by a series of rapid, high-pitched clicks that Thorne speculated could be some form of non-vocal communication. As Thorne worked, Miles tried to contact any allies he might have, fellow UFO enthusiasts and independent journalists he had occasionally shared information with. But his encrypted channels seemed compromised. Every message he sent went unanswered, or worse, bounced back with error codes he didn't recognize. It was clear that whoever was after them had extensive resources and was actively monitoring their communications. Suddenly, the bunker's emergency lights flickered and the low hum of the generators sputtered. "What's happening?" Miles asked, his hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol he had brought. Thorne rushed to the power control panel, his face grim. "Someone's nearby. They might be using an EMP device to try and knock out our power." They were trapped. Their underground sanctuary had become a cage. They could hear muffled sounds from above, the crunching of footsteps on the rocky terrain, the faint metallic clang of equipment. Whoever was hunting them was closing in, and their only hope lay in understanding the alien message before their pursuers broke through. The whispers from the static were growing louder, more desperate, and Miles and Thorne were running out of time to decipher their haunting plea. The EMP attack was short-lived, but it served its purpose, plunging the bunker into near darkness and temporarily disabling their satellite uplink. Working by the dim glow of emergency lanterns, Thorne frantically tried to restore their connection, while Miles kept watch at the reinforced steel door, his pistol raised. "They're trying to isolate us," Thorne grunted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "They don't want us sharing this." Then a breakthrough. Thorne managed to stabilize the signal from Miles' laptop, and a new sequence of symbols appeared on the screen. This time, they were accompanied by a distinct visual element, a series of complex, rapidly flashing light patterns embedded within the data stream. "Miles, look at this," Thorne exclaimed, pointing to the screen. "The audio fragments, they're synchronized with these light sequences. It's a form of visual language." Using his knowledge of ancient Earth languages that utilized visual communication, Thorne began to cross-reference the light patterns with the alien symbols and the fragmented audio. Slowly, painstakingly, a rudimentary form of translation began to emerge. The beings in the signal were indeed trapped. They described themselves as luminary, beings of pure energy who had inadvertently crossed into our dimension decades ago during an experiment gone wrong. They were held captive in a facility deep beneath the Nevada desert, a place where their unique biology was being studied and exploited. The mournful sighs Miles had heard were expressions of their longing for their home, and the rapid clicks were their attempts to communicate their plight. The word release wasn't just a random fragment, it was a constant plea. They were asking for help, for a way back to their own dimension. Just as the first coherent sentences began to form on the screen, the steel door to the bunker shuddered violently. They could hear heavy impacts and the sound of metal groaning under pressure. Their pursuers had breached the outer defenses. "They're coming in," Miles yelled, bracing himself against the door. Thorne grabbed the laptop, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to get this information out. If we can broadcast even a fragment of this, the world needs to know." Their sanctuary was about to become their tomb, but in their final moments, they had finally begun to understand the desperate whispers from another reality. The question now was, would anyone hear their warning in time? The steel door buckled inwards with a deafening screech. Miles fired a warning shot into the corridor beyond, buying them precious seconds. "Thorne, can you get the signal out?" he yelled over the din of the assault. Thorne's fingers danced across the laptop. The satellite uplink was still unstable, flickering in and out of connection. "Almost there! Almost there!" he muttered, his face illuminated by the screen's pale glow. The attackers, clad in the same unmarked black uniforms as before, stormed the bunker. Miles fought fiercely, using the narrow confines of the corridor to his advantage, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. He knew it was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed him. Just as a figure lunged at Miles, Thorne let out a triumphant cry. "Got it! A short burst, but it's out there!" He had managed to transmit a compressed file containing a portion of the decoded luminary message and the visual language key through a burst of satellite uplink before the power to the uplink died completely. The attackers finally subdued Miles, roughly handcuffing him. They turned their attention to Thorne, who clutched the laptop to his chest like a shield. "Give us the device," their leader commanded, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You can't silence the truth," Thorne retorted, his eyes blazing with defiance. "It's already out there." Whether that was true remained to be seen. The broadcast had been brief, a mere whisper in the vastness of the digital world. Would anyone have caught it? Would anyone understand it? Miles and Thorne were dragged out of the ruined bunker and into the harsh desert sunlight. As they were forced into separate black vehicles, Miles looked back at the desolate peak, a sense of grim finality washing over him. They had uncovered a truth that powerful forces wanted to keep hidden, a plea from beings trapped between worlds. Their fight was likely over, but perhaps just perhaps, their desperate broadcast had planted a seed of doubt, a flicker of understanding in the minds of those who were listening in the static. The echoes of Area 51 might yet be heard.
Days turned into a blur of harsh interrogation rooms and cold, sterile cells. Miles and Thorne were kept separated, subjected to relentless questioning about the signal, their sources, and who else they might have told. Their captors were not interested in understanding. They were interested in containment. They wanted to know how much Miles and Thorne knew and how much they might have shared. Despite the pressure, neither man broke. Miles stuck to his story of being a lone enthusiast who stumbled upon a strange signal, while Thorne, with the quiet defiance of a man who had already been ostracized by his peers, insisted that his work was purely theoretical. Meanwhile, in the vast expanse of the internet, something was stirring. A fragmented, heavily compressed file containing strange symbols and bursts of static-laced audio had appeared on several obscure online forums dedicated to fringe science and unexplained phenomena. Most dismissed it as noise, another elaborate hoax, but a few, those who spent their nights scanning the airwaves and deciphering cryptic messages, recognized something unusual in the patterns. Among them was a young, independent coder named Sarah, who ran a small, underfunded website dedicated to citizen science and data analysis. She had a knack for finding needles in digital haystacks, and the strange file piqued her curiosity. Working late into the night, Sarah applied her own algorithms and signal processing techniques to the data. Slowly, the alien symbols began to resolve, and the garbled audio started to make a little more sense. Sarah's initial findings were baffling, but as she cross-referenced the symbols with various linguistic databases and the audio with sound wave analysis software, she stumbled upon a series of light patterns embedded within the data stream, just as Thorne had discovered. With a growing sense of excitement, she realized this wasn't random noise. It was a language. Word of Sarah's discovery spread quickly through the online fringe community. Other researchers, initially skeptical, began to analyze the data with renewed interest. The ghost signal, the desperate broadcast from a remote mountaintop, was starting to be heard. As Sarah and other online researchers continued to decode the luminary message, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The story of energy beings trapped beneath Area 51, their desperate pleas for release, and the government's ruthless efforts to silence anyone who stumbled upon the truth started to gain traction within the fringe community. Sarah published her findings along with the original signal file on her website. Initially, it was met with the usual mix of skepticism and ridicule, but the sheer volume of data and the increasingly coherent translations began to sway some minds. News of the Area 51 ghost signal started to leak into the mainstream media, albeit as a quirky, unverified internet rumor. However, for those who had always suspected that there was more to the Area 51 story than the official explanations, Sarah's findings resonated deeply. Meanwhile, Miles and Thorne remained in captivity, unaware of the digital storm they had inadvertently unleashed. Their interrogations continued, but their captors seemed increasingly agitated, their questions now tinged with a hint of desperation. They knew that something had gotten out. One evening, a high-ranking official, different from their usual interrogators, visited Thorne's cell. He didn't threaten or question. He offered a carefully worded proposition. "Dr. Thorne, we understand your interests. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. We are engaged in sensitive research, and your interpretations could jeopardize national security. However, your expertise could be valuable to us. Cooperate, and we can ensure your well-being and offer you a role in our ongoing studies." Thorne, despite his weakened state, saw through the thinly veiled offer. They didn't want his help. They wanted his silence, and they likely wanted to control his interpretation of the luminary message. He refused. A similar offer was made to Miles with the added incentive of his freedom. But Miles, having witnessed the ruthlessness of their captors and now understanding the desperate plight of the beings trapped beneath the desert, also refused to betray the truth. The government's wall of secrecy, however, was beginning to crack. The ghost signal had found its audience, and the whispers from Area 51 were starting to echo around the world. The internet was buzzing. Sarah's website had gone viral, and news outlets that had initially dismissed the ghost signal were now scrambling to cover the story. Scientists, linguists, and even former government employees came forward with their own analyses and theories, lending credence to the luminary's plight. The hashtag #ReleaseTheLuminary was trending worldwide. Public pressure mounted on the U.S. government to address the claims. Initially, the official response was denial and dismissal, labeling the decoded messages as elaborate fabrications. But the growing evidence and the sheer number of people who believed the story made their position increasingly untenable. Under intense scrutiny, a reluctant government finally announced that there had indeed been anomalous activity detected near Area 51 in the past, but it was attributed to experimental military technology. They vehemently denied the existence of any extraterrestrial life forms or interdimensional entities. However, the seed of truth had been sown. Inspired by the luminary's message of confinement and longing for their home, and fueled by the bravery of Miles Corbin and Dr. Eris Thorne, whose disappearance had also become a news story, a global movement began to take shape. Protests erupted outside Area 51, demanding transparency and the release of the luminary beings. Citizen scientists organized online campaigns to further decode the signal, hoping to find a way to help the trapped entities. Inside the secret facility beneath the Nevada desert, the luminary beings, sensing the shift in the outside world, intensified their broadcast. Their light patterns became more complex, their audio fragments more coherent, their plea for release echoing across dimensions, and now across the globe. Miles and Thorne, still held captive, could feel a change in the atmosphere. Their guards were more nervous, the interrogations less frequent. They knew that something outside had shifted the balance of power. The story ends here for this chapter, but the implications are clear. The truth about Area 51 and the luminary beings has begun to surface, and the world will never look at the Nevada desert or the stars above in the same way again. The whispers in the static had finally become a roar for truth and freedom.